Today's episode of What's on Your Bookshelf is brought to you by Insignia Training Partners, the leaders in outsourced L&D talent and resources. Insignia is a full-service learning and development company that provides L&D talent to design, develop, and deploy your training solutions. Insignia specializes in providing the right resources for your projects at a fraction of the cost as opposed to bringing on new full-time employees. This includes fractional Chief Learning Officer services for enterprise training strategy, instructional designers to develop your training content and materials, facilitators to deliver in-person or virtual training to your staff, LMS administrators to manage the process, virtual training producers to make sure your virtual training is engaging and effective, and coaches to support the learning after training is completed. If you don't have a training department, that's okay. Insignia can be your bolt-on training department. With Insignia, you get dedicated resources providing fractional services by specialists in their field. Whether it's onboarding new hires, upskilling your team, or ensuring compliance, Insignia designs impactful programs that stick. Visit insigniatraining.com to discover their full range of services and to schedule a free consultation. Insignia is your partner for training success.
Welcome to What's on Your Bookshelf with your hosts, Denise Russo and Samantha Powell.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. This is our podcast where we're talking about the life and leadership lessons that we are learning from the books that are on our bookshelves, or really the books that we're taking off of our bookshelves and putting into our hearts. My name is Denise Russo. I'm here with my co-host and friend, Sam Powell, and we're in the middle of a book called Solve for Happy by Mo Gawdat. He was the former chief business officer of Google. And right now we're in the midst of going through what we call the grand illusions. It's the first part of the book. Sam, how about you tell our listeners that may be just catching up with us, what are grand illusions?
These 6 grand illusions are the things that you must bust to get to the happiness bottle. So he's got bust the 6 grand illusions, fix the 7 blind spots, and hang on to the 5 ultimate truths. So we've done 4 of the 6 grand illusions so far, which were the illusion of thought, the illusion of self, the illusion of knowledge, and the illusion of time, all of which were super interesting. And this next one is the illusion of control, which I laughed when I saw it because I talk to clients all the time about control. It's one of the reasons they come to me for coaching is that they feel out of control. And so I laughed when I saw that this is one of the illusions that we have to bust. But as I went through the chapter, I thought about, this is it, right? Like it absolutely makes sense that, really what we're getting at here is if we think we have control, we really don't. And, that's an illusion that we've got to work through. So I'm excited to talk through that with you today.
Agreed. So this summary of this chapter sort of is like, first of all, defining what even is control. And then the author goes through some things called the black swan and the butterfly effect, which I thought was really interesting. And then the span of your control, not the span of other people's control, but the span of your own control, sort of like the wingspan, I guess. And then what our actions and attitudes are around control and what we can do to control the things that are controllable. And what I found interesting in this chapter, Sam, was it's called Houston, We Have a Problem. And it started getting me to think about the fact of what parts of that was and wasn't in the control of the astronauts or even in the control tower people, because they identified a problem. But what really could they have done about it if there really was a problem? Some of that was way beyond their control, wasn't it?
Right. So we're talking about Apollo 13, right? Which was a great movie. And talking about how there's just so much that is out of your control and recognizing that, hey, Houston, we've got a problem. And then what do you do, right? What is in your control? What do you have available to you to work through that? And it's funny, he starts this chapter talking about, like this scenario of, you're sitting down, you're getting all your finances in order, you're putting everything together. And it's like, this is an exercise I do frequently. My husband and I sit down and, make sure we're good. Everything's planned out. Everything's, we're on the same page. Everything's tracking. And, knowing that, you can do all the things to take control, but things happen in the world that throws all of that, out of whack, right? So I look and I was thinking about, so my husband and I have this at this point pretty decently complicated spreadsheet where we track our family budget and finances and investments and all that sort of good stuff, that's morphed over time. And we do like an annual tab every year, right? So I copy the tab from last year, we make big adjustments, that kind of thing. And we usually adjust it quarterly, biannually, that kind of thing. But there's a tab for every year, right? So I have some history all the way back looking at, like how did we, over the last few years, have things grown and changed and whatever. But there are a few years where something's happened that I had to create a whole different tab because it's significant enough and it wasn't expected, right? When we sit down in January to do our planning for the year of, hey, here's the incoming money, here's expected things, here's what we're doing. But there've been a few years where, well, we didn't plan for that, right? And so now there's this significant change. So I've got like, 2020 whatever post, with like a comment, or I've got this or that or whatever. And it's funny because I laughed because that's how this chapter starts out, is sitting down with this like financial thought process and planning, and doesn't that feel so good? And all I could think about were these couple extra tabs I've got for these unexpected events that have popped up that, again, have no control over any of them that happened, but still feeling good.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it, because he did talk about how, of course, we feel at our most balanced when things are stable and when things are in control and when things feel not messy. But man, we could spend the whole episode today just talking about COVID and the disruption that brought, right?
Yeah.
Or
absolutely.
I was talking to somebody this morning about how when your and my job was eliminated in 2023, we thought that was a pretty dramatic time across the board for the country, right? It wasn't just the company we worked for that was laying people off. It was all over the place. And yet now, this year, at this time, almost double the amount of people are about to lose their jobs. These are things that, by the way, were predicted, and economists and other people said, be prepared for this. But the question is, how can you ever be really, truly prepared? Although he does go into a lot of detail in the book about this concept of really thinking that you have this illusion of being in control of something. And so he goes on to say that he calls events like layoffs, like COVID, like other disruptions, left turns, because they point us down a road we weren't expecting to take. And our path through life seems to turn left way too often. And when I read that part in the book, Sam, what I started to think about was, if you take 1, 2, 3, 4 left turns, you're back to where you started. So is it really that bad to take a left turn? Because if you took a right turn, whatever right turn means, 1, 2, 3, 4 right turns, and you're still back at where you started. You're no different than where you were. It's about the illusion of what you think about these turns that happen in life. And could those turns turn into something even better? I think I can say with confidence that the left turn you and I both had in March of 2023 has turned into something better than expected, that we couldn't have prepared for, that we didn't really have a true plan for, and yet it's turned out to be a really pretty great experience, even if not just for this podcast and the time that we get to spend with one another.
Yeah. And I think that, if I think back on my life and think about some of those left turn moments, right? It's those moments where something happened, right? Like I can remember sitting in an advisor's office in college, and one piece of information took the path that I was on, that I thought I was on, right, for my career and life and that sort of thing, and made a turn, right? It's like, well, it's not that now, so then it's something else. And then that, led to something else. And I think about all these instances that have happened that it's like, yeah, it did create, a quote unquote left turn. I don't know, it's probably like an exact 90-degree angle right turn. It's more of a, like, I'm just going to veer off to this path that's now to the left type of a thing.
Yeah.
But right. And you think about that and what I can think through the points. I could plot it out. I could show a visual of, here's these things that I thought I was on this path, and then something happened, or a series of things happened, right? That then just altered. And again, like that led me to where I am today. Right. And that's, I don't know. Right. Like it's just an interesting thing to think about. But yeah, all those things are things that were out of my control, every single one of them.
And
But
yet, it brought you to this where you are now, right? Like he talks about that being the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect was where you have these seemingly minor, unrelated events happen that culminate in some major change in your life. Had it not been maybe for that call you had with your advisor in college, you wouldn't be prepared for the things you're experiencing now many years later.
Exactly. Yeah. And there was a movie about the butterfly effect years ago. It's kind of a trippy movie, but yeah, the butterfly. So he talks about two concepts: the black swan, which is from Nassim Nichols Taleb's book, The Black Swan: The Impact of the Highly Improbable, and he talks about the butterfly effect, which is from a meteorologist, Edward Lorenzo. And I thought these two things were interesting together. I'd heard of the butterfly effect. I hadn't heard of the black swan because I heard the butterfly effect because of the movie, but I hadn't heard of the black swan. These two concepts together are interesting. I don't know, you want to explain what they are?
Well, basically, what he was saying in the first part is that if you imagine that there are these unanticipated things called black swans that touch every single life on the planet, he was talking about things like 9/11 happening or World War I happening. Now, this book came out before COVID, so I would say COVID happening is definitely a black swan that impacted every single life on the planet. And so he goes on to say that if you consider for a moment how many similar events have happened in your own lifetime, how many things that are like black swans have shaped your life, and that if you look at life as being random, that's the illusion, to think that life is random, but as opposed to it being a more I don't want to say controlled because this is the illusion of control, but a more constructed life, I suppose. Now, remember, Mo came from Google as an engineer, so he likes to think in terms of absolutes, I would suspect, to some degree, because he was a mathematician of some sort. But this is talking about how you can take something that's seemingly random, have a deviation of this random thing, turn into something else, and it ultimately point to nothing in life is actually controllable at all. The illusion we put into our minds is that there's a control. Now, he does then go on to say about the span of control, though. And for example, he says, what can you really control? So you earn money and you think, I'm going to save that money to buy, I don't know, something, a boat, a house, something that you've been wanting to buy. Have you ever had this happen to you, that all of a sudden you have that right amount of money and then the refrigerator breaks or the washing machine breaks or the car breaks, and you think to yourself, man, I saved that money for the other thing. And yet, isn't it so serendipitous that you actually had the money to fix the dishwasher or the fridge or the car or the whatever, because you had that money set aside? And so that's not an illusion. The illusion is you actually did something to save, but you ended up having to spend it on something different. And so he talks about how the really only things you can control in your life are your attitude and your actions. And so I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah. I laughed because this is what we tell our son all the time, especially in regards to sports, right? He plays all the youth sports. And this is the big conversation with him, right? You can control, we say attitude and effort, but effort you could say is actions, right? What are you putting into it? Right? You can't control the weather during the baseball game. You can't control the calls that the umpire makes or the calls the referee makes, right? You can't control what the other players do. You can't control that, your glove is slippery this day and the ball dropped out. Like, you can't control these things, but did you try your best? And did you have a good attitude about it, right? Like, those are the things that you absolutely 100% control, right? What you do with any given situation is what makes all the difference. I actually wrote a whole blog post on this when it came to getting, having your job eliminated and, going down that path, right? So I had a lot of people give me the well-intentioned, I know somebody who's been laid off and they say it was the best thing that ever happened to them. And I just argue like getting laid off, going through an event, right? Anything, it's not the best thing that ever happens to you, but what you choose to do with it can be if you do it, right? And that comes down to what he's saying, right? Your actions and your attitude, how you decide to take in the events of your life and move forward with them makes all of the difference and contributes significantly to your happiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I genuinely am a pretty positive person, right? When we did the last book, my default scores were all pretty high on happiness. But I've seen this a lot, like, and I go through an experience and somebody else goes through the same experience with me. And because I choose to take a positive outlook, because I choose to take action on it, and the other person chooses to wallow,
Yeah.
the output becomes really differently. And you and I saw this with people that, we had gotten laid off with, or people we had known who'd been laid off from other companies and things like that. Like, we saw the trajectory much differently because the attitude, right, was different. The actions that we took were different.
Yeah, I almost wonder if this is really, how do you remove emotion? So whether you're super positive by a natural state like you are, or whether you're like some of the people we've been coaching who are sitting in a natural state of dismay and despair and their life is over because they were tied to their title, not by their value. If you take the emotional part out of it and look at the facts, like you and I have both done the DISC assessment. We both teach the DISC assessment. We both coach DISC assessment. And I naturally fall on the less emotional side of the scale. And so when I was reading this part of the chapter, I thought, okay, I can understand this. This is that, for example, you strive for some goals, or like in the case of our kids, is they're striving to win a game or be their best in whatever the sport is. And you cannot predict the result. Like, Las Vegas has really bamboozled everybody into thinking you can predict the result. And some people win and some people don't win. In fact, there were people that won lots and lots of money recently on different horse races or car races or football games or whatever the sport that was being betted on at that moment, because their prediction was something that other people said could never happen. Mm-hmm. And it did happen, because the results are impossible really to predict because other things can happen. But when something unexpected happens, then he calls this the detachment concept, that tells you to accept a new direction and try something different again without sadness or regret or grief over the loss of control. Now, I would be totally lying, Sam, if I said to you that a year later, I don't still sometimes think about missing the old team or missing some of the work we did, or feeling either mad, sad, or glad about having our jobs eliminated. Those emotions are natural and they sit there, but this is about taking control, I think, of your emotion. Now, it's funny because when we think about what he says are the illusions, the grand illusions for this part of the book, like if you think about any of these things with people that are making bets, you have this illusion that your results are predictable, and yet the people that give the highest odds of winning are the ones that have a guess of something that they don't think is going to be predictable to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so he talks about, this is called a detachment concept. Like, I guess you can imagine people who have a gambling addiction are not detached. They're very emotionally caught up in it. Like, I'm just going to try one more time. I'm just going to try one more chip. I'm going to just try one more bet. But if you're not detached from the loss, you can change directions and try something again. It's probably what the best athletes do if they don't get so caught up in the loss, but in what they can learn from the loss. In fact, John Maxwell's book, Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn, is probably one of the best books about this, which is it's in the losing sometimes that you have wins. In other words, you learn the most when you lose. But the book talks about how it's not about loss from a sadness perspective, or loss of control. It's about getting rid of the emotion that might be caught up in a loss and looking at it from its practical perspective of your actions. That's this part of the book, is what are you doing? What are the actions you're doing? Or what are the actions you did that you should shift or change? What are the things that you did that brought success and the things that you did that didn't bring success? And you're really good, Sam, at helping people to map out their goal plans and their growth plans, because you can have intentions and expectations, but that's still different than action, isn't it?
It is, yeah, exactly. And and what he's really getting at here is that you have you have to take responsibility for your actions, right? You do your best. And he says my actions remain committed, right? Like, so we see this with like goal setting and things like that. Hey, I want to, get to this place. And it's like, okay, then we're going to put the actions in that commit you and put you on the path toward that place. But we are not committed to the outcome of that, right? We've got a goal that we're focused on, but the outcome could end up being something different. And if along the journey you realize that the outcome is something different or you want something different, we release that entirely, right? We are not attached, and this is the attachment part of it, right? We're not attached to the outcome. It's I do my best every day. And again, this is, he talks about this a lot. It's really bringing your life into the present. What am I doing now? What actions am I taking now? What am I committed to, right? What path am I committed to being on? But I'm not committed to ending at where I think I'm going to end, right? It's like showing up, I think, to college and having a major versus an undeclared major versus like whatever, right? Like you're on a different path. Like, oh, I come in and I want to major in biology. But maybe along the way, you find a love for art and you realize that that's it. Well, you're going to sit in a lot of suffering if you cannot detach yourself from this original outcome that you thought you were going to get to, right? Same thing with a goal. If you think that the goal is the only thing, getting to this goal is the only thing that's going to make you happy, you're going to sit in a lot of suffering when the path takes you elsewhere, right? When the black swans, when the butterfly effect pushes you in a different direction. And so, what he's really encouraging you with your actions is to commit fully with the actions that you're taking. Do your absolute best, right? When you lay your head down at night, did you take the best actions that day that you could have?
Yeah.
But release the attachment to what happens, right? To how things end up, right? It's like living life in this, I'm here for the experience of it, not for a purpose to get to something in the end, right? Like the point of life is to live. And if you think of it that way, right? Like the point of life is to live. And so therefore I just take actions that lead me down whatever path, and whatever path that is going to be great. And it's going to be interesting and it's going to be an adventure and it's going to be fun. And if you can detach yourself from those outcomes, that's where, I think that's the argument he's making, is that's where happiness really lies.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a conversation I have with Vincent almost every single day. So he'll call me up sometimes and say, I'm just calling to let you know I didn't do well on this test. And I'll say, well, did you do the best you could with studying for it? Well, no, I really didn't, because I was doing this or I was doing that, or I was caught up in this, or I was, okay. Well, then do you accept that you didn't do well on the test because you weren't prepared? Once he can get rid of the emotion of feeling angry at himself or angry at the teacher or angry at the content, I guess, he can somehow get past that and be like, okay, well, I accept that my actions or inactions gave me the grade that I got on this thing. But we always end the conversation by talking about what could you do differently for the next time? What will you do with the lesson you learned here for the next time so that you can do a little bit better? And this part of the book actually highlighted as something that I want to adopt as a mentality for all of 2024 for my own life, which was that he says, I made practicing committed acceptance my priority. I focused on doing the best I could every minute in every situation. I kept aiming high, but remained emotionally detached from the results. If I missed a target, I looked back, learned, and tried again as if nothing was lost, because nothing really had been lost. And so I think that when he described that, it's not to say you shouldn't be proud of yourself if something goes well, or you shouldn't be maybe disappointed if something doesn't go the way you don't want it to. That's the next part of the chapter, which talks about your attitude. But what I really liked about this part was that it's really simple, just not easy though, which is that you don't attempt to control things that are beyond the span of the present moment that you're in. And to appreciate and relish the moment that you're in. Or I think it was the last book. She called it savoring, right? Savoring the moments that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. And I've found this to be very, very true for my own life. The more I sit in the present, the more I commit myself to the moment that I'm in. Like, just generally, I am so much more joyful in my own life, right? I'm so much happier when it's, yeah, I've got like, doesn't matter what happens half an hour from now, right? Like, that's where the anxiety is. Where it's like, oh, trying to work ahead, trying to do whatever. But if it's like, right now, I'm committed to this action, I'm committed to this moment, right? I'm committed to this cup of coffee with my friend. Like, those are the moments that I live for and love, right? Like, some of my absolute favorite moments are sitting in coffee shops with friends, just talking about whatever, sitting on my grandmother's porch, talking about, life and thoughts and whatever like that. Like, those are the moments that are the most joyful to me, right? Is when it's just all present. I'm not committed to the outcome of what's happening right now. I'm committed to the actions, to this present space. And I just think that that's such an important thing for people to really live out loud.
Yeah, 100%. If you think about, do you even enjoy being around people who have a bad attitude? I mean, no. Who wants to be around that? Nobody.
Right.
So when you're feeling yourself caught up in that, why would you want to be around your own self? And so he talks about how, of course, life deals you a bad hand every now and then. That's just part of the game. And that you don't need to make a big deal out of every unexpected turn, every black swan, every butterfly fight. You don't need to make such a big deal out of it. Your path might be rerouted, but nothing is lost, he says, unless you decide to just simply quit, simply give up. If you're not willing to keep going forward, and that you could actually thrive in things that are seemingly out of control, but that it's all around your attitude. So when you think about this, you can think of things like, how do you control the controllables when you have immense sadness or grief? You and I have both experienced this in our life, and this book is built on the author experiencing immense sadness and grief, and you can't get back yesterday. And you could waste your moments today by thinking about yesterday, and you can't predict tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, when I think about, your attitude, I think that when I see people struggle with their attitude, I think it's a lot of times just means there's a lot of work to be done with dealing with your emotions, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that that's what stands in a lot of people's ways, is that they don't know how to, they don't have the skills yet to process through the emotions that come at them. And so therefore they slip into a negative space, right? They slip into this space of like, oh, like, this isn't going to work out. It's never going to do it. But in reality, they're just being assaulted by a bunch of emotions that they haven't learned to really process through. So I think that if you're right, like, your actions feel a little more tangible to me, like, of, what I'm doing is what I'm doing. Like, a lot of people, I think, can have a lot more control on emotions. I think people struggle more on this attitude side because we think we are a slave to the emotions that come at us. But again, like, you've got to sit in the driver's seat of that. You've got to, like, recognize emotion for what it is, right? These are our, little flags that tell us what's going on. There's a threat, there's a good thing, there's something happening, right? Like, emotions are just information. But if you let them control and flood your system, then you're not going to be able to control your attitude. But you can't, but the illusion there is you can, right? Like, I think a lot of people think that they're a victim to their emotions. Like, oh, I'm just so angry and therefore it's whatever. Like, I see this with little kids, right, who are learning how to deal with this. And you see this in adults who don't learn how to do this as children, right? Who don't go through this process of really learning how to process through emotion. And so I think that the attitude part of it is sometimes very hard for people who haven't had the opportunity or haven't put in the work to learn how to deal with emotions. And it's one of the most important skills, I think, just in having a happy and successful life.
Maybe it's about thinking of the possibility of an outcome, because he ends the chapter by saying he had to really look at his attitude and this illusion of control in spite of the situation of losing his son. And the way he was describing it was, no matter what my attitude, whether it's bad attitude or a good attitude or whatever variation of it, it still would never bring his son back. There was still nothing he could rewind to go to the hospital and change what happened with the nurses or change the place that he was delivered to when he had his accident. There was nothing that could be done differently today, right this second, to change the fact that his son died. Nothing.
Yep.
So how is his life getting any better in living by spending every moment thinking about something that can't be changed, was in the past? It won't bring his son back to him, and no amount of grieving will ever have the reward of actually seeing his son again. Like, that part is now past. And so the illusion of control, it seems like he described in the chapter, was that this emotion that he was caught up in, it doesn't mean that he could just turn it off and now he's happy, because he lost a big important part of his life. But the idea to think that the grieving will somehow make it better, maybe therapists would say differently, I don't know. But it seems to me that he knew that the happiness equation that he set out in this book would mean that he had to change his attitude and change his actions towards how he was going to live out the life. And so what we're going to continue to learn as we go into the next parts of the book is how he took all of this knowledge and wisdom that he was gaining to try to live a life of happiness despite sadness.
Yeah. And I think that the thing, like when I think about this, when I like read this part of it, right, is, he says, I set the expectation side of my happiness equation based on the truth, right? Ali left. He's not here anymore. All I can control now is my actions and my attitude. And I think that that's really it at the end of the day, right? You have to learn how to process through emotion and get down and grounded in reality. What is the truth? And once you can ground yourself in reality, and this is actually in the, this is part of John Maxwell's Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn book, is like, he has a whole chapter on like facing reality. Like, in order to learn from life, in order to move forward, in order to get to happiness, you have to ground yourself in what is, right? You have to be able to process through all of those emotions that are coming at you that tell you a lot of things, and you have to integrate those into your life, right? That's the big thing with grief, is that grief is an integration. It does not go away, especially if it's in the face of like a big loss, like a child. Like, it doesn't go away. You don't get over grief ever. You are grieving always, but you integrate it into your life because it is there, right? The fact of the matter is you are always grieving in a way, but you integrate it in a way that is grounded in reality, that moves you forward. And I think that that's really the key there, is that, yes, the your attitude is everything. But the attitude has to be based in what the truth is, right? What is really happening.
Attitude is everything. I love that. So that's going to be a good closing note for us. So next time, we're going to be in the last of the 6 grand illusions. We're going to be talking about fear and the illusion of fear. So I don't know, I'm a little afraid of that chapter coming up. But we'll be talking about fear next week. Sam, it's always so amazing to just sit and talk with you, because I learned so much listening to you and what you're taking out of these books. And I hope I'm doing the same for you, and that we're together doing the same for our listeners. So until next time, friends, this has been The Grand Illusion of Control. We hope that you are getting value from these chapters. If you do not have this book, we highly recommend it. Scott will have a link in the show notes for how you can get a copy of the book, Solve for Happy. We'll see you next time on a chapter called, well, you might as well jump. So until then, I hope you have a great day ahead, a great week ahead. We'll see you next week for another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.